Good evening. My name is Nick Muley. I'm chairperson of Queer Ontario, and following my presentation will be Casey Ora, the vice chair of the organization. By introduction, Queer Ontario is a provincial network of gender and sexually diverse individuals and their allies who are committed to questioning, challenging, and reforming the laws, institutional practices, and social norms that regulate queer people. Operating under liberationist and sex-positive principles, we fight for accessibility, recognition, and pluralism using social media and other tactics to engage in political action, public education, and coalition building. To begin, Queer Ontario is very much in support of having anti-bullying legislation in place and implemented in the province of Ontario in order to protect all youth from such damaging and oppressive behaviors. Although we believe both Bills 13 and 14 are steps in the right direction, we also believe much work is still required for these bills to reach a point of efficacy for the very youth they are designed to protect, and thus we're submitting to you today a series of amendments of which we will discuss in short throughout our submission. Considering the content of both bills, we feel that Bill 13 has a stronger base from upon which to expand in our pursuit of strengthening the supports for youth in schools across Ontario. That being said, we have taken the intent of some elements of Bill 14 and modified them for inclusion in what we perceive to be a stronger, more effective bill. As well, we have drafted additional amendments for your consideration that will further strengthen the bill and reaffirm the commitment of boards and the ministry in their quest to foster equitable and inclusive environments as a means of supporting youth. So to begin, I'm going to talk a bit about language, and that is that we distinguish the terms bullying and harassment in the following ways. Bullying is an action or behavior carried out with intent that is targeted, consistent, repeated, and involves a power imbalance. Harassment is an action or behavior carried out in a generalized way that becomes white noise, contributing to a toxic environment, creating an oppressive culture, i.e., loose use of the term gay in a derogatory manner, such as derisively describing a clothing article as gay. There is ample evidence both of these exist in schools across Ontario, and both must be dealt with given the impact they have on those victimized by them. We also distinguish between a school climate and a positive school climate. The former operates and functions with little or no attention to the sensitivities of diverse populations therein. The latter takes a conscious and active role in recognizing and being sensitive to the needs of its diverse populations towards the ongoing development of an accessible environment. This latter climate would be in keeping with the equity and inclusivity policy. Finally, we recommend that the term gender expression be added to the list of social locations outlined in number 7 of the explanatory note of Bill 13, along with gender identity and the others. The transsexual and transgender communities have indicated the importance of both these terms, as is currently being advocated for explicit inclusion in the Ontario Human Rights Code, as they more accurately reflect and capture the continuum of experiences of members of the trans communities. Secondly, we urge consistent inclusion of this terminology throughout the bill, as these populations are currently inconsistently recognized at best in the proposed bill as other populations are. So talking a little bit now about professional development. Internally within school boards, we are calling for the mandatory and continuous education of all staff to assist them in recognizing, being sensitive to, understanding the complexity of issues involved, and being prepared to take responsive action to incidents of bullying and harassment. If the end goal of the education system is to foster and produce holistic youth, then the system that produces them must commit itself to being holistic in its aims, goals, policies, and practices as well. We recommend that one of the 3 mandatory professional development days be devoted to anti-bullying and anti-harassment issues. This would ensure staff is exposed to and given an opportunity to learn about these issues at a micro level. Such development is integral to ensuring that staff have the ability to be able to recognize problematic behaviors and actions, as without such knowledge base, the staff in schools across the province are woefully ill-equipped to respond to bullying and harassment. For aspiring teachers in training, we are calling for the implementation of core requirement courses on equity and inclusivity to prepare the future teachers of this province for the diversity of students they will be teaching, and the ability to contribute to creating a sustaining and positive school climate. Similar to the professional development of practicing teachers, courses such as these are currently only optional. For teachers currently in the field, we call upon the Ontario College of Teachers to facilitate mandated additional qualification, also known as AQ courses, addressing equity and inclusivity issues, so that currently active teachers can be brought up to speed on relevant concepts, issues, and most importantly, teaching interventions, strategies, when faced with incidents of harassment and/or bullying at any level within the education system. Such a requirement, when paired with the mandatory anti-bullying and anti-harassment professional day, allows for a base to be established through the AQ course and then supported regularly via the mandatory professional day. Addressing bullying and harassment within the context of equity and inclusivity at each of these levels creates a systemic apparatus that will support the recognition and implementation of legislation dealing with bullying and other matters. These structural supports will be essential for all stakeholders in the education system, from students to teachers, from support staff to administrators, in ensuring systemic consistency with Education Act regulations. The clear end result of such professional development is a greater commitment to creating a knowledge base and skills for teachers and staff in schools and administrative positions, thus providing them with the tools necessary to identify and combat bullying and harassment. I turn it over to Casey now.
Okay, I'm going to speak first about compliance and accountability. One of the major reasons why Queer Ontario supports a strong piece of legislation that adequately and effectively addresses the issues of harassment, bullying, and other matters is that our current Ministry of Education has consistently devolved these responsibilities to the board level. Boards of education vary across the province with regard to their willingness to address issues of equity and inclusivity, and in particular, the lesbian, gay, bisexual, transsexual, transgendered, two-spirit, intersex, queer, and questioning populations of students, with a clear divide existing between public and Catholic boards. One need only consider the publicly funded Catholic school boards in this province and their continual abdication of their duty to support LGBTQ youth in their rights to form a gay-straight alliance under currently existing program/policy memorandum 145, and the ministry's unwillingness to enforce its own policy is a blatant example of this. By putting these important concepts into legislation, it will ensure the ministry takes the responsibility it should have taken all along to ensure compliance and accountability of its boards, rather than leaving it up to LAR to follow through or not. There already exists an equity and inclusivity policy and corresponding guidelines for policy development and implementation that the ministry can use to jumpstart this legislation once passed, requiring all boards across the province to comply. Further to this, and as a means of accountability, we call for the ongoing data collection by boards in the form of school climate surveys to be continued, and that further, principals deliver annual reports to the boards of the data. As well, boards should deliver biannual reports to the ministry of the cumulative data for their schools, and the ministry should deliver a biannual report summing up data gleaned from all the boards. This will assist in continual monitoring and managing of problematic issues that contravene principles of equity and inclusivity. Such quantitative statistics and qualitative responses will help shape and reshape interventionist responses as issues unfold. Moving forward to the next point, I'll be speaking about student voice. Of course, at the crux of all this are the students themselves. At Queer Ontario, we believe in the independence and agency of students to determine for themselves the supports they feel they best need, a principle that has consistently guided our support and actions. Over the past year and a half, it has become part of public consciousness that students enrolled in Catholic school boards requesting the establishment of a gay-straight alliance have been denied this right. The reality of the situation is that such denials existed well before the stories of the struggles of LGBTQ youth seeking to form such groups came to light. All of this, despite the aforementioned PPM 145 that explicitly gives them the right. It is not lost on Queer Ontario that the language surrounding GSAs and other like groups as proposed in Bill 13, currently before us, attempts to sidestep PPM 145 by indicating that boards support the establishment of GSAs or another name with no clear designation being made as to who would determine that name. This is unacceptable, for it denies students their choice in naming a supportive organization that accurately represents who they are and their mission to support one another. We strongly and resolutely recommend that the name of such clubs be determined by the student. Recognizing this would align Bill 13 with PPM 145. Otherwise, you are creating an inconsistency that will leave the Ministry of Education open to future challenge. In order for students as well as staff who have been impacted by bullying or harassment to have a voice, we call for boards to establish a transparency mechanism that allows for a complaint process that protects anyone victimized by bullying or harassment without fear of further reprisals. We also call for the minister to intervene in unsatisfactory cases. In conclusion, Queer Ontario urges the government to move forward with this bill or a combination of Bills 13 and 14, as well as give strong consideration to including our amendments to ensure that the serious issue of bullying and harassment are adequately recognized, sensitively addressed, and responsibly intervened with. These are serious issues that can mean life or death for the youth of this province. We at Queer Ontario also recognize that some youth are more targeted than others for bullying and harassment, whether based on their race, ethnicity, age, size, looks, sexual orientation, gender identity, gender expression, disability, religion, class status, etc., or the intersection therein. The focus of our mandate is on the gender and sexually diverse populations. Given LGBTQ community's long history of being targeted for harassment and bullying, we feel it is absolutely essential that we be explicitly named in this legislation to ensure some measure of protection and regulation over these incidents. We will now take questions.
Thank you very much for your presentation, and we do have about 3.5 minutes left. So the first is to the government side. Ms. Sandals.
Thank you very much for your presentation. That was very helpful, and you've got a number of helpful comments that you were making here. You're distinguishing between bullying and harassment, and I'm not quibbling with that. I agree with the distinction that you're making. But I was wondering, because in your definition of bullying, that what's in the words that you've used, or at least the concepts you've used, are reasonably consistent with the Bill 13 definition of bullying. So are you in fact supporting the Bill 13 definition, other than the bits that you included about trans?
As we said from the onset, we feel that Bill 13 is a stronger base from which to work upon and develop. But that being said, there definitely was parts of Bill 14 that we pulled forward the intent from and modified for use in this bill, specifically mostly around compliance and accountability measures. We felt that Bill 13 lacked in that area.
Yes, and the bills have different strengths. So
Yep.
What you're saying is take Bill 13 as the base and incorporate some of the other ideas that Bill 14 brings in, which are positive ideas as well.
Yeah, if you look at the accompanying piece, it is in fact Bill 13 that has been amended and modified.
Okay, and I note in your comments there that you talked about the whole issue of who gets to choose the name of a GSA, and I'd just like to assure you that that was the intent of the original recommendation of the Safe Schools Action Team, on which PPM 145 was based, is that if students request that there be a club, that the students should be the people that influence the naming of it. Certainly we heard students speaking to us of school climates not positive, in which identifying a GSA as such would have been problematic to the members. So in those cases, the kids would have chosen a different name, and we would certainly want to respect the right for the kids to choose a name which is appropriate to their comfort level or their circumstance.
Yes, and our position is that for that to even happen at this point, you would need to modify the language with regards to that provision to make it clear that it is the students that would be able to determine that, because regardless of the intent of PPM 145, in practice, that intent is clearly not being respected by the boards, and the ministry is not stepping in to enforce it.
So we need to look at just clarifying the language.
Yeah, we make a recommendation that
students
explicitly
are
says as
influencing
determined by the pupil at the end of GSAs or another name, and that makes the distinction very clear, and it gives them the right.
And
Thank you
consistent.
very much for your presentation. That concludes all the time we have. So we, again, thank you for your presentation. Let me find my sheet here.